Welcome back, STS Nation. In the next episode of the Geographic Profiler, we will be back with Peter Faulding. Peter is going to take us behind the scenes of the forensic search at Peter Tobin's former home. But first, we have a special guest with us here today who is going to walk us through the crimes and psychology of Peter Tobin. Dr. Lee Mellor is a behavioral consultant, investigative criminologist, and member of IRIS. His areas of specialty are crime scene behavior, sex crimes and paraphilia, offender profiling and psychology, 911 phone calls, offender communication, and more. Doc is a former VP of ASOC and head of behavioral, a consultant for law enforcement, and accomplished author. You can find Doc's many books in stores or on audio platforms. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you, Doug. Good to be here. Good to be on this side of it. Now you get to do all the work.
That's true. And I should mention that to our listeners and viewers that the first podcast I did was your podcast, Murder Was the Case. Mm-hmm. I met you in Montreal.
Yes, at the hotel.
At the hotel. I met you in Montreal at the hotel, and we discussed domestic terrorism, Oklahoma City bombing, and then we discussed Waco and Ruby Ridge as well. I have a strong academic background in terrorism, and it's always been a passion of mine, terrorism studies. So yeah, that's interesting. That's fun that was the first podcast that I did.
Yeah, that got me kind of more interested in terrorism. Up until then, it was serial killers, sexual homicide, mass murder, and at some point I just reached the end of my knowledge with that and started looking at other things, and terrorism and cults were the next two avenues that made a lot of sense. What I liked is looking at terrorists and trying to figure out how they could be ideologically different but the same, and how they could be ideologically consistent but different.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I've never really gotten into the cult side of it. I mean, obviously, a bit with Waco and kind of as it relates to some terrorist events and how it connects.
Well, what I figured out, and I probably got about 2 levels deep into it, is that you have to understand the followers. So what is the psychology of a cult follower?
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be separate from understanding the leader. Then you have to understand the relationship between those two things. And then understanding something like the structure of a cult is probably less important than you'd think, but it is somewhat important. And actually, what they do believe is not important at all. One cult could believe in like a strict Christian interpretation, maybe the end is coming, the apocalypse, all that. And then you have another one that believes we all have to wear this certain type of running shoes because the aliens are going to arrive. And on the surface, those things seem to be very different. But how they function in a cult, at least to me, where I got to the end of it, it was like that actually, it's maybe the most interesting thing is getting into their cult beliefs, but it's actually not important from a criminological perspective.
Did you find that, before we get into Peter Tobin, did you find that in your study of cults that it was more psychological or institutional?
It's social psychology. It's about attachment. Basically, what most cult leaders do, and it's not just the cult leader, because as they get followers, the followers participate in this as well, but they isolate the cult followers from other people, and they break their attachment bonds, and they establish a different bond of attachment between the cult leader, where the cult leader is, and the cult more broadly, is the only thing that they are now attached to. So it's where they turn for comfort and they turn for companionship, but at the same time, it's abusive. So it's very much like being in a relationship with an abusive spouse who has isolated you, and you don't know who to run to. You've been conditioned to run back to the abusive partner. And so really it's about breaking those bonds of attachment and establishing new ones. Is really the core mechanic underlying how cults work, and the relationship between cult leaders and cult followers. So I would say that's social psychology, but it's also something like attachment psychology too.
And I mean, and there's a lot of cases where there is a crossover or a link between cults and serial murder, terrorism. I guess, you know, the most famous one is probably Manson, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that one's a little bit different. I don't think that many cult leaders are full-blown psychopaths. I would say delusional narcissists, sometimes really damaging, violent narcissists. They can be as bad as a psychopath and how it all plays out. But just from a strict psychological perspective, I'm not sure that most of them are psychopaths. Manson was a psychopath. And the dynamics of that cult were, in many ways, very different. So yeah, there are exceptions, but if you look at most of them, I think I did a little personal study. Jim Jones, David Koresh. There was the cult with Jeffrey Lundgren. It was like a Mormon offshoot cult, and I saw so many similarities between those leaders and between how the cults functioned. What I think is particularly interesting about cults is that you can see people who are highly agreeable suddenly participate in brutal crimes. And one of the things that we know about psychology, at least using the 5-factor model of personality, is that people who commit violent crimes tend to be disagreeable people. And when it comes to cults, that can be, I won't say inverted because disagreeable people still participate in it, but you can actually become violent because you're too agreeable. Whereas a disagreeable person would be like, sorry, you won't let me call my family, and I can't see my wife anymore, and I have to believe everything that you believe. Go fuck yourself, right? But an agreeable person would be like, yeah, okay, right, and go along with it, and then slowly be made to agree to murder.
Is that because they've been conditioned, or is that because out of fear of disagreeing within the cult?
Initially, a very disagreeable person would not be brought into that type of situation. Not typically, because disagreeable person draws boundaries and lines. Right? I'm a very disagreeable person. You could never convince me to get into a cult. I'm pretty sure of that. I've got other flaws, but I'm pretty sure that wouldn't work, because the minute someone says something that okay, you have to give up this. Okay, well, maybe, yeah, I agree with you. Or maybe I should give up material things. Well, you can't call your mother anymore. I'm sorry, like, to join your organization, I can't talk to my mom anymore. Yeah, no, go screw yourself. I'm out of here. Right? The more agreeable you are, you're like, okay, well, maybe for a bit, and you go along with it. And then once the attachment bonds are broken and the new ones are established, it's like, okay, now you are afraid. Like, initially you were afraid initially you were inclined to agree because of your personality, but now you're afraid to disagree because of the way that the
Right.
structure of your life is set up. So it's complicated stuff, and that's what makes it interesting.
I love it. I love the behavioral psychology part behind it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to get you back on to discuss cults. That sounds like a lengthy, in-depth discussion.
Right, and like you were saying too, where does the cult end and terrorism begin? Well, they overlap, and organized crime too, and sometimes serial murder or mass murder, as we saw in the Manson family. So these things, they are discrete categories, and we can talk about those discrete categories criminologically and the things that tend to happen within those categories, but they can overlap. I'm sure we could probably recognize that there are cult terrorists who were also serial mass murderers or serial killers who had committed a mass murder. I'm sure that exists. And with jihad, right? Like, how much is a jihadi a cultist, and how much are they a terrorist, and how much are they sometimes just a mass murderer? And what I would argue is that It almost depends on the level of the authenticity of their ideological belief. I think that sometimes you have a jihadi who is a jihadi for 5 minutes. I've got to commit a mass murder. Okay, I hate people. I'm alienated. I want to lash out against society and be someone to make a statement. Okay, which costume am I going to wear? Okay, I'll be an Islamic terrorist, right?
Mhm.
And so I would say that they're almost not a real jihadi. They're just putting on the suit. But then you have people that have this deep religious devotion, which is supported by theology, right? So we can get to Peter Tobin now.
We have to get back into that because I
Yeah.
even have a a personal story that kind of relates to that, but
Mhm.
I have so many questions, so we'll have to get back into that at some point.
Mhm.
Okay, yes. Before we get into Peter Tobin, just going to throw this up there for all our viewers, listeners, a little more difficult, but Lee has these are the 7 books, correctly? I've got all 7 here.
Yes.
So Lee's got 7 books out. You can find them in print or on various audio platforms. I highly recommend them. And I'm working my way through them. I haven't got to Behind the Horror or Conspiracies Uncovered yet, but eventually I'll get there. And but it's terrific reading if you're anything involved in crime, whether you're law enforcement, a student in law, criminology, or just a true crime fanatic. So highly suggest looking into these books.
Yeah, and I would say the most serious books for developing your criminological and criminal psychology knowledge are the textbooks, which are the most expensive too, unfortunately for you. Understanding necrophilia and homicide, a forensic psychology casebook. That's probably some of, I think, my most important intellectual and analytical work. But Cold North Killers and Rampage are also very good. I wasn't as knowledgeable about the subject back then, so there's things I would change because I've learned since I wrote them. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of value in them too, particularly from understanding homicide from a Canadian perspective and a very broad overall perspective. The crime book is just fun because that gets into criminal structures. That was where I got into organized crime. I wrote stuff on Yakuza and Hell's Angels and the Medellin cartel. And then the 2 newest ones, Behind the Horror and Conspiracies Uncovered, they're just kind of fun.
I'm looking forward to getting into them and reading them because I've had a couple discussions with you about what's in those books, Conspiracies Uncovered specifically, and it's a whole world that I've never, I haven't dived into. So it'll be interesting to get into that.
Well, we talked about maybe doing JFK assassination, right?
Yes, we did. Yeah, the possibility of discussing because of the JFK files being declassified now, getting into that and having a discussion on that.
Right. And as much as I love to do that, and I could do that, one of the main challenges of the JFK assassination or many murders that are associated with conspiracy theories is, okay, we can talk about the facts, but do we have the right facts? And it's something that even research can't reveal sometimes, because you can go to the Warren Commission, which is the official government document, and they've made errors. So it becomes a way of like we could discuss things and we can exchange facts and we can try and get to the truth around that, but who has the correct facts and how do we know that, and how much research does that take? And at the end of the researcher, is it going to get to the correct facts or not? So I would say that we could discuss it as a matter of interest, and we could make arguments. But are we, at the end of it, there's going to be, as there always is with anything you write about, something like JFK, people are just going to be coming and going, "You're wrong. You got this wrong," and they'll be sure you're wrong, and you might be wrong, but they also might be wrong.
Very true. And even when those files finally come out, are they going to be complete?
Well, if the big question is, did the CIA have anything to do with it?
Right.
And if the CIA did have something to do with it, you really think they would write that down? I mean, they've written
I
down
wouldn't
stuff.
think so.
Yeah, they've written down stuff with other things that they shouldn't have done. Particularly in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Mind control stuff, but they tried to burn those documents. They probably shouldn't have written down in the first place. It's amazing that they did, but I guess they have to somewhat keep track of the research and the spending, right? So, but that's the thing with the JFK. It's not an ongoing process. It's not a research project. You don't have to account for it. It's something you just have to get done and then forget about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That'd be an interesting discussion. I guess time will tell. I mean, my knowledge of the JFK assassination are the basic facts behind what happened. And, I've been to the book depository twice. I've toured it.
Yeah,
It's
I've been there too.
It's a pretty neat museum. But that's my kind of the extent of my knowledge on the JFK.
Well, before we pass on, okay. You're a good shot. We've established this. You're someone that spent a lot of time. I'm not a good shot. I have not spent much time with firearms. I'd like to spend more. I'm working on it. But I hear two things: that shot's impossible, or that shot's easy. Which one is it, Doug?
I would say from what I've seen, it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. No moving shot is easy.
I think you also have to factor in probability too, right? Is how probable is it? Is it the most probable explanation of what happened?
Right.
Let's get to Peter Tobin.
Let's get to Peter Tobin.
Okay.
All right, we'll come back later on that another time. Okay, so Peter Tobin, and here he is. Peter Tobin is very. Everybody in the UK knows who Peter Tobin is. He's a convicted serial killer and rapist in the United Kingdom. He's less well known in North America just because we generally know those offenders who are in the country that we live in. But if you don't know Peter Tobin, this is who he is. We'll get into a bit of his life, and then Lee's going to walk us through his MO signature and the psychology behavior behind Peter Tobin. And again, this will all lead into the next episode with when we go back and speak with Peter Faulding, who him and his group, Specialist Group International, they conducted the forensic search at Peter Tobin's former residence in Bathgate. So a little bit about the life of Peter Tobin. He was born in 1946. He died in 2022. His family life at home, he was, when he was young, he had, I think he was the youngest of 8 children with 4 older sisters and 3 older brothers, I believe. He went to boarding school at a young age. There were some behavioral issues. If we were going to move ahead, we're going to skip ahead to his profession, and this will kind of lead into his MO. And
Before we do, Doug, I just want to establish 2 things. I think he was sent to like a Borstal, which is like a boys' home, like kind of in between that and a prison in the UK.
Okay, so not quite a boarding school, a little bit different.
No, it's for delinquents, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. And also, because I know where we're going with this, and it is always relevant somewhat, particularly when you go back to, people born in the 30s or 40s or something in the UK. He's from a Catholic family.
Which kind of shows later on in his participation in the church and various organizations.
Yeah, you'll see why I brought that up when we talk about, we get a bit more involved in this.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So profession-wise, he had a profession for a while working with the water department, where he actually dug trenches for the water department. And you'll see where that comes into play when we get into where these bodies were found. His crimes that we know of span from 1991 to 2006. After his convictions, he was ultimately convicted of life in prison. And at one point he was attacked in prison by another inmate, but in the end his health got the better of him, and he had a suspected heart attack at one point. A little while later he had a stroke, and then he ultimately died in prison. But when he started his known offending again, he was approximately 45 years old. So that's where we are with Peter Tobin, and we'll come back to this, but what we'll do is we'll touch on his crimes first. Lee, do you want to touch on his crimes, or would you like me to walk through them quickly?
Well, when we say his crimes, are we talking about his most egregious crimes first, or are we talking about his history of, for instance, domestic abuse, and it seems to be some incidences of sexual assault too?
I think that's important to get into, and I think we will. I think we'll just go through what he was convicted of first, just
Okay,
so people
sure.
have an idea of who he was and what he was convicted of.
Yep.
And then we can go into his other crimes as well as his history of domestic violence.
Okay, so why don't you go through? Why don't you talk about the murders from the '90s that we can prove, Doug, before we move on to the one for which he was convicted, and we'll talk about some of the patterns and observations uh, related to those.
Sure. And we should also mention the two young girls that he
Mhm.
assaulted and who survived. So those two girls, that was in 1993.
Yes,
Uh,
but hold on. Before we, I think the murders took place in '90 and '91, right?
the first one in 91, the first two in 91, yes.
Yeah. So why don't we start with that? Because then we can go chronologically, and we're actually, because we don't want to make it sound like he's building up to this, because he isn't. He
Okay.
does these first. So can we do those?
Perfect. Let's do
Okay.
that. We'll start with the two victims here, and then we'll get into the third victim later on. As Lee said, we'll go chronologically.
Mm.
In February 1991, February 10th, 1991, Vicky Hamilton, she was 15 years old. She was last seen in Bathgate in Scotland. And some of the maps and images I have on here are I took off the internet. These are off of BBC. So she was last seen in Bathgate, and she actually lived around the corner from Peter Tobin, his residence there, and Peter Faulding gets into that a little bit more. She was last seen at a bus stop. The next victim on August 6th of 1991, she was last seen at Junction 8 of the M25, as it mentions there, and that's Dina McNichol. Both Vicky and Dina's bodies were ultimately found at his residence in Margate. And we'll come back to that when we get into the investigation and the search efforts. So they were found there in 2007. After these two victims, there was the two young girls who Lee and I were just discussing a moment ago. And now that incident happened in 1993.
Mhm.
And between these three victims here and these other two girls who were ultimately survivors, you can start to see um, a mixed MO in how he picked up and how he selected his victims. So the other two girls, in 1993, they went to visit a neighbor of Peter Tobin, and the neighbor was not home. So they asked Peter Tobin if they could hang out, if they could wait it out at his place. And he said yes, and ultimately ended up drugging and sexually assaulting these two girls. And he actually left those two girls for dead. I believe he turned on the gas or something in the house and left those two girls for dead, but they survived. He spends time in prison, he gets out, and then in 2006, on September 29th, 2006, Angelica Cluck, uh, her body was found at St. Patrick's Church, and we'll show a visual of that in a moment. She was found under the floorboards at St. Patrick's Church. So you have the three victims of homicide: Vicky Hamilton, Dina McNichol, and Angelica Cluck. And you have the two young girls who survived um, Peter Tobin's assault in 1993.
All right. Should we start analyzing?
Yes, let's dive right in.
Okay. So Vicky Hamilton, as you said, she lives near him. Do you remember how old she was? Was she like 14 or something?
15, I believe. She was
Okay.
15.
Okay. So I'll just highlight two. These are all either teenage girls or girls in their 20s. So he has a victim type. It's a young post-pubescent woman. So with Vicky Hamilton, either he has seen her around where he lives and has been fantasizing about her for a while, or he hasn't and he sees an opportunity. And it's, of course, he could be fantasizing and see the opportunity too. I think what's interesting about this is that he kills her, and he initially buries her in his backyard. Am I correct, Doug?
In his yard, yes.
In Scotland, so around where she lives. So he basically kills a neighbor. He kills a girl from the neighborhood and buries her in the backyard. It's not very smart, but he gets away with it. But, you know, the police, if they were doing their jobs right, and I don't know if they did or they didn't, they're going to look at people in that area. That's what I do. You know, of course you do. You go from house to house, you find out who's living there. And I don't know if he had a record at that time. That's an interesting question, but it doesn't seem to me like a very smart crime.
His record at that time,
yeah,
was from 1970. I think he was charged with forgery and
right.
burglary, I believe.
Okay, so lots to say here. What I'll say is you have someone who's been in a borstal since they were a kid and has exhibited behavioral problems. They've committed forgery, burglary, and now we know that they've committed murder, sexual assault, and because of some of the things that transpire in this crime, like I don't think you should target Vicky Hamilton. It's too close to home. Those two girls that come by, you drug them and sexually assault them in your own apartment and then leave the gas on. So you've left drugged victims in your own apartment. You're not getting away with this. This leaving the gas on is a really half-assed attempt to cover it up, right? What I'm seeing is impulsivity here too. So what does this add up to? Early behavioral problems. Obviously, he's got affective deficits. He's impulsive. And when you put this all together, he's a psychopath. He's a clear psychopath. A lot of people think that every serial killer is a psychopath. No, I don't know. Maybe more than half, but not all of them. And in the case of Tobin, we see someone who's probably, you know, easily above 30. So he's a clinical hair psychopath, and he might be like above 35. Highly psychopathic person.
And is that for everybody listening? Is that what's the scale? Is 35? What's the top? What's the top of the PCLR?
0 to 30. It's Robert Hare's psychopathic checklist revised. 0 to 30. Hare says that most people score 5. Okay. I have used this only for research purposes. I've scored quite a few serial killers, looking at reliable true crime biographies and other documents. Whenever there was enough of them, I've deemed a serial killer was worthy of that. And, you know, can you get a precise result? No, even different reviewers will get different numbers. But if they're within 3 points, they're considered to be reliable. For instance, in my book, Rampage, I did kind of a post hoc psychological autopsy on James Roscoe, who is a mass murderer in Canada. And I got him up to 30. I had him at a 30. And I spoke with Matt Logan, who is like a psychologist for the RCMP. And Matt Logan had him at 33. Now, Matt's score will have been more accurate because Matt had the real files. I was doing it out of secondary sources. But the point is, James Roscoe is a psychopath between 30 and 33 because you have two independent people who have been educated on this and have corroborated it. So what I'm saying with Tobin is I think this guy's like a 35 or above, and it only goes as high as 40. So you're looking like Paul Bernardo, Richard Ramirez levels.
I was trying to find the name. All I found in I believe it was Wikipedia was that a senior psychologist diagnosed him a psychopath.
Yeah.
So I couldn't find the name. Would they have been using, I guess that would have been 2006, 2007. Would they have been using the PCLR?
I would think probably. What I should say, and this is important, a tidbit of information. In Europe, the diagnostic cutoff point for a psychopath is lower. It's 25. Now you're going, well, how can that be? Like, you're either a psychopath or not. And it's like, actually, that's not really true. It's like degrees of psychopathy. And if you understand psychopathy as being linked to poor executive function in the brain, so in the prefrontal cortex, and deficiencies in the amygdala, which is emotional processing, you could understand how levels of malfunction could actually be linked to it, right? So you could like have half function or or lose partial function, or you could have almost no function. So that's why psychopaths is more like a gradient.
Let's
Yeah.
go back to Vicky. Take it away, Doc.
Okay, so was she found naked, Doug?
So, yes, I believe so. I'm not going to say 100%, but I believe she was. But she was, when she was moved from Bathgate to Margate,
Mhm.
she was wrapped in plastic. So I
Yeah.
assume she was naked, but I can't confirm that. But she was wrapped in plastic.
I'm only asking because I'm almost certain that he sexually assaulted her. I don't think that we have forensic evidence of that, but based upon his other crimes and just like what would motivate such a thing in the first place. Um, this is a sex crime. We know from Tobin's other stuff, which we can discuss. We will discuss a bit later, that he's a sexual sadist. He's motivated to cause pain in his victims, but then it's more that observing their fear and suffering sexually arouses him. And it might not just arouse him, it might sexually thrill him. The more that he inflicts that pain, the more it escalates. And so that's really the motivation, from a sexual standpoint. I mean, he's also just a malevolent character and probably gets some sense of joy out of taking a cherished person from the world and controlling her, and all that stuff is tied up. I don't really like it when they break lust and control too much apart from each other. I mean, they're so often closely linked that I don't really see them as being discrete motivational categories. He will have killed her with a knife. Do we have forensic evidence of that, Doug? My
We do.
supposition is he killed her with. Oh, he did. Okay.
We do. Yes, it was a knife, and then they found DNA on it from Vicky Hamilton.
Okay. And Vicky was also at least partially dismembered, correct?
Yes, she was dismembered when they found her, which is, well, I'll let you tell me what you think about that first. Yeah.
Right. So when we come to the killing with the knife at this point of looking at his crimes, um, I know what the answer is, but just so I take you through the process, we don't know whether killing her with the knife is just something he chose to do, because for whatever reason, maybe there was a knife handy, right? Maybe he just thought it would be most efficient, or whether it's psychologically gratifying. I know the answer to that, but we're gonna get to it. Um, and we have to look at the same thing with the dismemberment. Is this something that he does out of utility, that is, MO, or is it a signature behavior, which is psychologically gratifying and not necessarily of paramount importance to the commission of the murder? So I would ask you to think through this. If you're going to bury someone in your backyard, why would you dismember them?
Well, okay. So dismemberment, it's generally speaking, it's for transport or concealment. Almost all the time, it can be sexual. It can be to send a message. But if I'm going to consider it as, I don't think it's for transport.
No,
He's moved her from Bathgate to Margate.
but not.
Either
But hold on, Doug. Not initially, right?
not
She's dismembered
initially.
and put into the first yard,
Yes, not
right?
initially.
Yeah.
So eventually he moves her either out of a possession thing or forensic countermeasure, doesn't want her to be found in Bathgate, or a combination of the two. Why he initially dismembers her, the only reason I could see for it is it may allow you to dig a smaller grave.
Now that is a consideration, but it's also a lot of work to dismember someone. So it's not
It
like
is.
you're really saving time on the labor. And if I wanted to make the body smaller to fit in the hole, I can think of other ways, like tying the legs to the neck, like folding the body in half, getting like a few bungee cords and wrapping them around to compact it. The dismemberment is messy, it's time consuming, it's risky. It leaves more forensic traces in your house. So I would say it's possible that he did that, but I don't think it's the most parsimonious explanation, particularly considering he stabbed her, right? So we've got that choice of using a bladed weapon to end her life. I think that the dismemberment as a sexual component, or it has like an exploratory component. So it's something that he either gets him off, or something he thinks might get him off, or something that he's interested in, like Yeah, I'll kill her and I'll cut her up and put her in the ground in little pieces. It could have a control element to it, and as I said, the control and sex is often linked.
Right.
So then, so that's what I would conclude from that, is that in this case, it was at least signature dismemberment, probably sexually motivated, but not just MO. So he puts her in the yard, and then shortly, how long after it is he moves to? He's in, was it Bathgate, and then he goes to Margate.
And then, yeah, not long after, he moves to Margate, and he
Yeah.
digs up the grave. He digs up the grave, and he takes her with him.
Now, that's a question. There is that MO or signature, and that one's harder to say because you can make an argument either way. Well, look, I don't want to be leaving a body in the backyard of my house, because if they do some digging there, like maybe they're going to put down a patio or put in a pool or a pond or something like that, and they're going to unearth her, then they're going to know it's me. So I'll just take her with me. So that would be MO. A signature component is, she's mine. I want to keep her under my control, right?
Right.
Psychologically gratifying. And it could also be both. And it probably is both. He's probably had both of those considerations. So sometimes MO and signature can overlap, which things are not usually in discrete categories in human psychology and behavior and motivation. It's important to understand them as being such. That's like level 3 of your education knowledge. And then the next level is knowing, where those bleed over into each other. So what we learned about Tobin too is he moves quite soon after he murders Vicky.
Mm-hmm.
This therefore may be a common reaction to what he does after murder. It's like he starts to get stressed out. He starts to think, I'm going to get caught too much. Just better if I move on.
Well, that's what he did after the two young girls in
Mm-hmm.
'93 as
Mm-hmm.
well. He immediately after, he joined a church group, and he changed his name.
Mm-hmm. So we're establishing possible patterns here. So he moves from Bathgate in Scotland to Margate in, is it Kent, England? I think it's in the south of England, right?
It is in the south. Yes, I
Yeah.
can. I'll pull up the map here in a sec. Before we get into Margate, do you have any insight onto his MO as to how he selected and how he came to have Vicky Hamilton at his residence? Do you think it was, in a minute with Dina McNichol, we'll see possible opportunistic or trolling activities with the two young girls? It was more opportunistic. They came to him.
Okay.
But right
so
now,
we're just kind of jumping ahead. So what I was going to do is I was going to look at those cases, and because we don't know how he got Vicky, we know she was local. She was at a bus stop. But if we see that in all other cases they've been opportunistic, the most reasonable thing to expect with Vicky was that it was also opportunistic. She lived near him. He probably just saw her at the bus stop. And then how did he get a hold of her? Well, he could have threatened her. He could have enticed her with promise of money or cigarettes or alcohol. I guess this is where victimology comes in, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this type of analysis. The point is he did get her, and I think it was opportunistic. Now the question I think though is that mean he's always trolling? Is he always looking? Is he always footing around looking for an opportunity? Or does sometime an opportunity arise and he finds himself unable to control himself?
that's a good point.
Or unwilling in that moment. Yeah.
Right, because he doesn't, at this point right now, he doesn't seem to be actively out looking for victims, unless, like you said, he's always looking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
You are correct. So Margate is right down in the south. So he moves down to Margate, and shortly after, within a few months, he comes across Dina McNichol, and Dina McNichol was hitchhiking with a male companion who they got a ride from Peter Tobin. Peter Tobin, they dropped off the male companion, and that was the last that Dina McNichol was seen.
Yeah, if you're a male companion and never allow for something like that to happen, Not that people really hitchhike anymore, but there's other ways that can play out. It's always better to just waste your time and, be precautious. Yeah, so he sees an opportunity again. She's his type. I would bet she's probably stabbed as well. Do we know that one for her?
I'm not sure on that one.
Now she isn't dismembered. That we would be able to tell.
I don't
So,
believe so.
so maybe he doesn't get out of dismembering the victim what he thinks he's going to, or maybe it's just too much effort, or it's too messy. It's something he tries and he moves on from. She will have been raped and probably killed in a painful way, because he's got that sexual sadism. And then she's put into the backyard is it the same Margate property as Vicky, or
It
is it
is.
different one? Okay.
Same property.
Yeah, so he's making a little corpse garden there. I think we see a lot of this. I'm not speaking statistically, but just from my own knowledge of British serial murder cases, we seem to see a lot of people being buried in the backyard or kept inside the house. And I think that's because the UK is so small, and it's not easy to go like where I live right now. Uh, Putting someone in a wooded area is easier than putting them in my house, right?
Right.
But it's not like that in the UK. There's lots of people about the countryside is not really wild. It's a decision. It's a decision to have country here. And so having them in the backyard, it will be part of keeping them close, being able to keep control over them, maybe a sense of ownership. But I think it's also practical. Like, do you really want to take these bodies and try and bury them on a moor or, heath or something like that? Do you want to go to an area where there's a trail that people walk through all the time or where kids could be playing? So I think the McNichol murder doesn't really tell us much, except that there's a consistency between that and the Hamilton murder. Same type of victim, same age group roughly. They both appear to have dark hair, killed probably in the same way for the same reasons and kept in the same place. So it's useful to us in that it establishes a pattern, and like you said, that we see that he's opportunistic.
And do you think, and I guess I should have briefly touched on this when I spoke about his life. So he did have 3 wives.
Hmm.
The wife 2 and 3 he had children with. I think the second child with wife 2 passed away shortly after birth, but he did end up having so one surviving child with wife 2, and then with his third wife a surviving child.
Hmm.
And all 3 wives said that he was always charming initially and then would eventually turn violent.
Yeah.
And we can get into the domestic violence part. Now I know back in the 1990s, hitchhiking was a lot more common, but looking at his psychopathy, do you think that superficial charm was a big part of his MO?
Yeah.
Making girls feel safe in his house, hitchhikers feel safe.
Yeah. It's not going to work if you stand out as being a monster, right? You have to put on some sort of airs. I think it's more relevant probably in his relationships than actually getting the girl in the car. Like, when you're hitchhiking, you're looking for a ride, and the likelihood that you're going to turn one down it's much less than people think. It's something that I've done, and you're standing in the rain and you want to get home, and you're wondering if the ride's going to come before nightfall. It's not always a certainty. So yeah, if you go up to the car and the guy's frothing at the mouth, you're not going to get in. But even if he's not particularly pleasant, most of the time you'll get in. You're just grateful to have a ride. So I don't think you'd have to be particularly charming or even disarming, just not alarming.
And that having that traveling companion
Yeah,
probably gives you a false sense of security on some level too.
you have slightly more security, but you've got to keep on your toes. Like, even if you hitchhike with a male, you could be 2 males hitchhiking. What happens if they pull a gun on you, right? You could be drugged. But there's many ways that could still go wrong. But what happens is he waits for the male. He gets rid of the male first. I'd like to know what that conversation was like, actually, and then continues on with her.
Yeah, I think from what I read, he willingly got out of the car. He was just getting dropped off.
Yeah, no, probably should have just dropped them both off like that. But I'm
Yes,
saying if there's a way to solve this, if you find yourself in that kind of situation, just both get out. You can find your way. You can find another way once you're both at your friend's home.
that's good advice. I mean, you don't like you said, you don't see many people hitchhiking anymore. People are a lot more wary of it, but it still happens quite a bit.
Well, cars have become more ubiquitous part of life, right? Hitchhiking is more of a bygone era where young people, particularly of a certain social class or economic position or age, they just simply didn't have access to cars or vans or something like that. And there's pretty good public transportation in the UK, but my understanding was she went out to like a music festival, which is probably in a field somewhere.
Mm.
And there's also there's a lifestyle sense in this too, right? You can see with like myself, she has a bandana on that picture. There's probably a sense of wanting to be young and liberated and free, and to not be afraid. Everyone chill out, and it's hard to strike a balance between those two things. But it's amazing sometimes what we can infer about someone just from a couple pieces of information like that bandana and going to the music festival and hitchhiking, right?
So if we get into the third homicide that he
Hmm.
was convicted for, Angelica Cluck.
Hmm.
Uh, so Peter Tobin was working at a church at the time, St. Patrick's Church, I believe,
Yeah.
in
Yeah, it's a
Glasgow,
Catholic church. Yep.
Catholic church. Okay, yeah, you know the area fairly well. You lived in Wales for some time.
I've never been to Glasgow, but I've been interested in the history and culture of the UK. And when you are things like sectarian divisions, you realize the importance of them. Glasgow is a very sectarian city. I think less so now, even though there can still be some issues. A lot of it more recently is around football, soccer, and the Rangers, which are a Protestant team, Presbyterian, and
Right.
Celtics, as they would say,
Celtic.
which are a Catholic team and are more about uh, the based around the Catholic population, which is largely Irish, which came over and settled in Glasgow. And there's a lot of rivalry between that. I don't know about now, but historically, if you were a Protestant, you wouldn't go into a Catholic pub, and if you're a Catholic, you wouldn't go into a Protestant pub. I mean, it's really violent, horrible
Uh,
stuff.
I've been obviously, I mean, you know this, but I've been a soccer player and coach
Mhm.
my entire life, and I didn't even know that little bit of information that you were just saying there. The rivalry between Celtic and Rangers and kind of the background behind it. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
and it bleeds over into Irish politics too, right? You have the Ulster Scots, who are Protestant Scots who came over and settled in Northern Ireland, right? And so that you have the genesis of the problems in Northern Ireland being from that, well, and then the relationship of the English to this. So you can't understand culture and history, or really people in the British Isles, uh, until you understand how important this all is and what it means for those people historically and culturally and their loyalties. So we're going to get to that with Tobin. I just really wanted to point that out. He gets to that church and he's working there as a handyman. He's going under the alias Pat McLaughlin, if I
Mhm.
remember correctly.
Yes.
This is after he's paroled. He's paroled for that incident
Right.
with the two girls. We don't need to discuss that again. We've established that it's the same victim group, and that it's impulsive. It's a stupid crime because it means yes, of course he's not going to get away with it. Even if they were killed, he was not going to get away with it.
Mhm.
It's in your own house.
Right.
I even think that he might have done violent acts with them, outside of sexual violence, but like destructive violent acts of them before he turned on the gas. So but they're not going to notice that.
Mhm.
Um, Point is, he's paroled in the 20 no, it was in the 90s, no, 20 early 21st century, early
Yeah.
21st century. He's paroled. Pat McLaughlin, he goes to work at St. Patrick's Church. Angelique Cluck, beautiful young Polish girl. She's studying at a university, and she's working at this church to help pay the rent. And once again, he just sees his opportunity. She's an attractive young woman. She's alone, and is it smart? No, it isn't. He hasn't enticed her away. He hasn't set this up. But there she is. I've got an opportunity. I'm going to do it. He rapes and he stabs her, and he puts her under the floorboards of the church. Well, she's going to be found, and it's going to be tied to someone in the church. He can't help himself. This guy, he's very impulsive. I think what's important about the Cluck case is we know he rapes and stabs her. So we've got stabbing again, right? What we're seeing here is a theme established. Would it make the most sense to stab her? I don't know. Maybe given the public setting, strangulation would have been better or something. Stabbing is messy. You know, if you strangle, you can stop the screams easier. But this seems to be his thing. You were talking about the wives. He was domestically abusive and controlling to these wives. I think I've looked into interviews or testimony from about 2 of them. Like, he was really bad. He wasn't just jealous and controlling and wanted to manage every aspect of their lives, but he was also sexually sadistic. One of his wives described how he put a knife in her genitals. That's about as much description as we have, but it's like, okay. He also he cut off her cat's head and
I read that, yeah.
threw it out the window or something. And, you know, just as a bit of a portrayal of what Glasgow was like at the time. At one point, she looked outside the windows and saw a group of school children playing football, soccer with the cat's head. I mean, it was a hard ass place, man. So to dial it back, if you do that to your wife, yes, you're sexually sadistic, but you're not just sexually sadistic. You've got a thing for knives and blood. And then we see that across all of his crimes. Knives and blood. So, because sexual sadism can be pretty broad. There's a lot of serial killers and lust murderers who are sexually sadistic. But he's specifically sexually sadistic when it comes to knives and cutting. And that, you know, then you go to the dismemberment. It's like, well, that's a little bit more evidence for the dismemberment perhaps being similarly motivated. So when we're looking at other cases, Doug, which I know we're going to get into, and Operation Anagram did that, one of the primary things, but besides looking for young women, is going to be young women who are stabbed or cut. And that could go all the way from a few stab wounds to superfluous stab wounds to acts of mutilation. I would consider putting a knife in your wife's vagina to be an act of mutilation and disfigurement. Dismemberment is the same thing, right? Not disfigurement, but it's a mutilative act. So that's what we'd be looking for.
With Angelica, she's found, as you mentioned, found beneath the floorboards.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think he selected an inside location that he would have had to have significant time to himself? He's a handyman. Maybe he worked overnight. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to an outdoor location at his house.
Because he selected the opportunity. He saw the opportunity again. She was at the church. He was at the church. And he just pounced on it. Was he going to be able to lure her back to his apartment? Probably would have been quite difficult. And it wouldn't necessarily have been much safer. I think that he just said, I can rape her right now and kill her. And okay, well, how did you get the body out of there? Maybe he didn't even think about that. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't think about that. He was just so caught up in being able to do the thing that he liked. Then it's like, okay, what do I do with this body? Well, can't transport it. I don't have a big suitcase with wheels. I don't have time to dismember it. If I did have a big suitcase with wheels and I rolled it, you know, to the bus or whatever, or put it in my car, I don't know if he had a car. I'm going to guess he didn't have a car. I I'd be seen doing it. Actually, the quickest and easiest thing to do is to put her under the floorboards. They're going to look into this, and when they do, they're going to realize that there's a guy called Pat McLaughlin working there. That's not his real name. Then they're going to find out what my real name is, and they're going to get me. So I'm just going to be. It's all about time now. I'm going to put her under the floorboards. It's going to be quick. She's not going to be found. That gives me time to get away. The time it takes to find her now is the time I have to get away.
And the forensic evidence pointed to her being alive when she was placed under there. Do you think that was a mistake, or do you think that was something more sadistic?
It could have been either. We don't really know. He's not. He doesn't really show us anything necrophilic. He is primarily sadistic. Sadistic is you get your jollies out of watching them in pain and fear and humiliation. So after he's done that, he stabs her. He probably assumes that she's dead. She's gonna die if she's under the floorboards and she's bleeding out. It might be that he doesn't care. It might be that he gets some kind of sick sense of enjoyment doing it. It also could be he just doesn't notice. He doesn't finish the job because taking it past the point of death is not the primary thing for him.
And we know he's done it before already, where he wasn't able to finish it, and the two girls survived, right?
Yeah, he got off torturing his wife. He didn't have to kill his wife, right? He tortured her. This guy is an anti-mortem type offender. It's all about the stuff that happens before death that matters. So if you understand it as his focus, there's any number of reasons she could have been alive when she was put under the floorboards. Would he have enjoyed it to know that she was alive under there and maybe suffering? Well, maybe, but just because she was alive, it doesn't mean she was conscious. She probably wasn't conscious.
Right.
My guess would be he just took this bloody, limp body with the eyes closed and put it under the floorboards and didn't really stop to check her vitals and really make sure the job was done, and maybe didn't care.
So getting into Operation Anagram.
Mm-hmm.
So Operation Anagram was the investigation into Peter Tobin's into possible crimes committed by Peter Tobin. So they looked at a number of other potential victims, missing persons, and we're trying to figure out whether these were Peter Tobin's victims. It was led by David Swindle. I guess one of the things that they were looking into primarily were his different locations. So they were looking into the different places that he had lived. They knew that he liked to bury bodies or conceal bodies. So they were looking into these different properties. They dug up a lot of them. They didn't dig up all of them, but they dug up a lot of them. And then they were also looking into other leads. And one of those was jewelry. So they found 30 some pieces of jewelry,
Mm-hmm.
women's jewelry at
Mm-hmm.
his residence. And they were trying to, they were put these out to the public, and were trying to identify potential victims through
Mm-hmm.
this jewelry.
Yeah, and it's hard to say because jewelry is valuable and he is a thief. But then again, if it is, why didn't he sell it? It could be. Look, first of all, let me acknowledge I'm aware of serial killer souvenirs. I'm just going through all the possibilities. Okay, could be that he's just a thief. He's maybe not quite a klepto, but he just enjoys taking things from women and owning them. I mean, maybe he doesn't have to kill them just to feel that he somehow owns a part of them. We see that with putting people in the yard, right? It's a sense of ownership, or the domestic abuse, right? Controlling women's bodies or something related to their bodies. Yeah, and it could be that these are victims either of murder, severe assault, or rape. Rapists also take souvenirs. It's not just serial killers. It's often, it's like they're so uniquely psychopathological that look how weird they are. They keep these things. Yeah, rapists do too. So I think that the most likely thing is that I would bet a lot of money that Peter Tobin had additional victims. I would be very comfortable with that. I'm talking about murder victims. Some of those probably are from women he killed, and some of those are probably from women he raped, and some of those may be just things that he stole.
He claimed to a psychiatrist in prison that he had 48 victims total. I mean, we both know that serial killers are known to boast and brag and tell lies.
Yeah, they're pathological liars. Actually, psychopaths are more specifically. Yeah.
What do you think of that number? When you think of more victims, do you think it's could be as high as 48? Or, I mean, given the fact that he didn't start offending his known offenses until he was 45, I guess, what do you make of both of those, the number and then the age?
Well, look, it's possible. Gary Ridgway had 49. Well, actually, had more, but he's admitted to 49 victims. Picton, I think, admitted to 49 at one point. I think they found DNA from like 31 women on this property. Yeah, it's absolutely possible. So I can make an argument for it, and I can make an argument against it. The argument against it would be he's too impulsive of an offender to get that many. All the crimes we looked at showed some level of impulsivity. The McNichol one is probably the most professional of the ones we're aware of. Hamilton is well executed, but really you shouldn't strike that close to home. And then the one with the two girls and with Anne and with Clark, those are the ones he gets caught for, and he's really impulsive. So my argument against it would be that of the murders we know of him, they're not well conceived. Now, you could say, well, that's a sampling error because we know about the murders because they were ill-conceived. Those are the ones we know about. It could be that we just don't know about the murders that are that he did well.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, you can argue either way. 48's a lot. So who are his victims? Okay, they're all they seem to be all middle-class girls. We're not looking at people who are prostitutes or on the or homeless or on the margins of society. Broadly speaking, these are all middle class girls, or lower middle class, maybe working class, but certainly they're within society. So if he had these other victim groups, like if he preyed on prostitutes or something like that, yeah, potentially. It's hard to imagine 45 additional girls from like that going missing and it not being a major, not being getting more attention.
It's a very random number, right? It's not over 30,
but it isn't.
Over 40.
It isn't. It isn't actually though, because 48 is exactly the if you were following serial killer lore, for instance, which he may have, 48 is the number that Gary Ridgway had at one point, which was the highest number any serial killer had in American history. So if you were just lying and you cared about stats, you would pick 48 at a certain point in history. That's what you'd pick. So I don't see it as that. I think that he may have just done that. But then you might say, well, why didn't he pick 50 to be higher?
Right.
Yeah. And maybe he just said, oh, I'll say 48. I won't round it off because I want to sound believable. If I say 50, it makes it sound like I just pulled that number out of the air, but 48's a little more specific, Yeah. He killed more. Did he kill up to 40? I would bet on he killed more. I would not bet on he killed 48.
Okay. And what do you make of the age he was when he started, at least the offenses we know of, 45? Do you think he would have started? I mean, we know that he did. We know that he committed in his 20s, burglary and forgery. Do you think he would have started violent offending around that time too? Or do you think it is possible that he didn't start till his after 30 or 40?
How old was he with his first wife? Was he in his 20s?
Yes, he was in his 20s.
Okay. Well, he was already torturing her for sexual pleasure at that point. I mean, that's what I would call inserting a knife into her vagina, and he was routinely beating her. So
And
he
that
had
only lasted a year, that relationship. Or they
right.
were married for a year.
Yeah, I would say that he demonstrated the capacity to do that kind of thing by that time. And like he'd always been this problematic child, and he'd been to a borstal. So he never had any empathy for, so like remove the whole, would I care about killing someone? That was never there. Maybe the motivation to do it. Well, that's linked to his anger and control of women and his sexually sadistic sexuality. So that's all there by the time he's in his late teens, probably. Um, I think it's all there. What we then might want to look at is, okay, for the crimes that we know he committed was what was going on in his life. Was he single at all those times?
I believe so, but
Mhm.
I'm not. I'd have to confirm that.
So this is one of the things you might want to look at, is that if he was single, and particularly newly single at those times in his life, well, it could be that that's a type of stressor, or maybe he lost a job or something like that. You're looking for stressors that make him not as invested in preserving the facade of normalcy, right?
So I just quickly looked here. So his third wife was
Mm.
89 to 93.
Okay, now was she living with him though, or had they broken up? Like,
I don't know that.
but that's more important, right? It's not the divorce; it's them being apart. Given his history, she could have got out of there within a few months.
Could have.
Was she living at that place in Scotland with him? That's the question, and if so, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that these things take place when he's not in a relationship. He might get a sense of like being able to control his wife and possess her and hurt her and derive sexual pleasure from that. And I imagine he probably demanded sex acts regularly. That might have been enough to satisfy him when he was in those relationships. But then when those relationships fell apart, um, a number of factors: stress, anger toward women, and also the opportunity of just not, just having your own home or your own space and more time to yourself. Those could be linked to when he's going after victims.
And do you think these activities, these maybe in his mind what he perceived as relationships in some way, do you think that might be the reason why he didn't remarry a fourth time after 93?
No, I think that he probably would have married again if the opportunity had arisen. And that's something we see again in psychopaths, as many short-term marital relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Those marital relationships often tend to be very parasitic and very one-sided. He's also moving around all the time, right? He can't stay in one place, which is another. That's not specifically a psychopathic item, but a need for stimulation and a sensation seeking, that is. And so that's often associated with moving to new places, but also people who burn their bridges, right? Like they come to the new community, and then within a year they've lost their jobs, hurt people in the community, maybe stolen and lied. Their reputation is ruined, and then they move again.
Like you said, this map, he moves around a lot, and it's not he doesn't have a set career path, so he's not necessarily moving for a profession. Maybe he picks up small jobs here and there.
To escape it'll be partially to escape the heat. It'll be partially because he burned bridges where he was, and it'll partially be because of novelty and the need for a new sensation. It's like
Right.
a cat, right? The cat goes wandering off. Cats aren't dogs; they're not loyal.
Now that as we get more and more into this discussion, you're identifying, and I'm starting to see all these different traits that come up on the PCLR, the
Mm-hmm.
psychopathic traits, and I'm just in my head, I'm just ticking boxes.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. And so when you actually learn these things, when you actually sit down and learn how the PCLR works, and you learn the nuances of it, a lot of people just learn it superficially. They think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. When you actually learn the instrument and you start to apply it in the way it was meant to be applied, and you start to add things to it, like I didn't do this as a formal academic, like a journal article, because they don't interest me really. But just for myself, I started adding things on to kind of like a crime scene psychopathic checklist.
Okay.
Um, so a few things that you would see appear in crimes that can indicate psychopathy. Um, in the use of instrumental violence rather than reactive violence. Many people are capable of reactive violence. That means you get pissed off or you stressed, you blow your stack, and without planning to, you attack someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, many people are capable of that. Instrumental violence is cold-blooded, goal-driven violence. Like, I'm going to drive over to that guy's house right now. I'm going to knock on his door. When he opens the door, I'm going to shoot him in the face. Then I'm going to take his wallet out, take his money, get in my car, and drive away. When you just say it, it doesn't seem difficult. But like to actually, get the gun and load it and get in your car and drive there, and every step of the way go through with that. Like that takes a special type of person. That doesn't mean they have to be a psychopath to do that, but it's something that psychopaths can do very easily compared to everyone else. So instrumental violence, extreme violence, torture, mutilation, necrophilic acts, right? Diversity of sexual victims. So a sex criminal who doesn't just rape women or doesn't just molest kids, but rapes women and molests kids and might sodomize your grandmother if he has the opportunity. Um, People are just a series of holes.
After he was diagnosed as psychopath with these traits that you're just mentioning, do you think they should have looked at older victims or male victims as well, or just focus on the victimology they knew of?
Well, if he targeted male victims, it'll probably be for a different reason, right? Um, the sexual serial killing, the more psychologically motivated killings committed by a serial killer, there'll be more consistency between that. But it doesn't mean that a guy who, like, if a guy gets pleasure raping, hurting, and killing women, if he thinks he's able to, and there's a male who he's bothering him or he wants something from, there's no reason that he wouldn't do that emotionally or psychologically. He's able to do that, whether he has the balls to or whether he, deems it worthy. That's a different thing. But you see that with some serial killers. So they have like a set of offending they do against one victim group, and then they have a couple of other victims in other groups that they target for different reasons. And that's a whole other discussion. But no, like what you would do is you go, okay, who are the additional victims? And what you do is you create a spreadsheet and you put the relevant fields into that spreadsheet. So you have one column, um, female, female, let's say 12 to 25, female 12 to 25, stabbed, okay, buried. You fill out as many of those you can without stretching it too much, and then you prioritize those victims. And you're always going to run out of money before you get to the end of that list of victims. So what you do is you put all the victims like that on a list, and then you look into them as much as you can. And in a perfect world, you would go, okay, then who, right? But in reality, you've run out of money by then. Police departments have finite resources, and it has to be treated like that. You can't just keep a running tab, a running open tab every time there's a serial murderer. We investigate every unsolved case in the country to see if they did it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole point of profiling. It's a system of triaging, of prioritizing suspects, or if you're starting with a suspect, you're prioritizing victims. I don't mean that in the sense of prioritizing the importance of victims, but prioritizing the likelihood of victims to be attributed to a certain serial killer.
The Operation Anagram started in 2006. It ended in 2011, and it ended because they didn't have enough on any. They had a couple missing persons or victims that were right at the top of their list that they really believed that Peter Tobin was responsible for, but they didn't have enough evidence. So again, the operation ended, and there was probably, as you mentioned, there was a financial part of that too.
Tobin didn't talk. There's serial killers who were talkers, and then there's ones that don't talk. And Tobin was like, if 1 is blabbermouth and 5 is unbreakable vault, he was like a 4.5.
So he talked a bit to his, well, who knows, to his psychiatrist, at least enough to say that there were more victims, but not enough to kind of identify any of those victims.
Yeah. You could see this desire for control throughout his whole life. And I some people throw that into every serial killer, but I really think it's evident in this case. He's controlling, jealous and abusively controlling the women he's in relationships with. Gary Ridgway didn't do that. And he's controlling the bodies that, when at least of McNichol and Hamilton, he wants to keep them close. If you look at his physicality, he's fairly neat and tidy, right? He's an orderly person. So this is something else that you take into consideration too, is personality traits and how they might manifest at crime scenes. I would expect Tobin's crime scenes generally, to be quite neat, even when they're impulsive. There's a level of putting things away, right?
He was using his residence for most of the crime scenes. As far as I know, there wasn't a lot of physical evidence found within the residence. The graves were found outside. They found the knife at Bathgate, but other than that, I don't recall reading that there was any other forensic evidence found within the residence.
Yeah, he's putting things in little compartments, and doing so with his own life too. It's like, at home, there's this woman who's terrified of me, and who I revealed the devil to when I walk through the door, and then when I leave, I'm someone different. I'm a handyman or something like that.
I want to finish off with, and there's no rush, but I want to finish off with Bible John. So as part of Operation Anagram, the 3 victims of Bible John were included, and let me just add that up here.
Okay.
And eventually they ruled out Tobin based strictly on location, where he was living at the time. He wasn't living in this area. I know you know quite a bit about the Bible John case.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I guess, of initially putting those 3 victims in, was that the right call? And what do you think about, could he have been responsible for these victims?
Have you covered Bible John on your show before?
I have not.
Okay, so let's just do a brief overview. Bible John was the name of an unidentified serial murderer who killed at least 3 women in Glasgow between 1968 and 1969. The first, Patricia Docker, went out on a night. It was like a very cold night. It was like an ice storm or something like that. I believe she was technically married, I think, and had a baby, but she was more or less estranged from her husband. And so she had gone out. She told her parents she was going to the respectable dance club. It looks like she sort of dipped in there for a second, but then she went to the Barrowland. Barrowland is a legendary venue in Glasgow. Lots of great bands have played there. And in the 60s, it was a happening place. It was one of the places where Catholics and Protestants could go and spend time together. I think there was no alcohol served on the premises. That was probably a big part of it. It did have a bit of a sordid reputation, people shagging in the bathrooms. And on the night that she went out, it was the infamous over 25 grab a granny night. She was 25. That the grab a granny is the joke that they made. Meaning it's like people that want to hook up women that want to hook up who are 25 and older.
Okay.
Yeah. Keep in mind, this was a time where people were marrying at 18, right? So Patricia, not much eyewitness stuff on that one. She's found near her parents' home, naked and strangled. And depending on which report, there's a sanitary towel, so a tampon or a pad or something like that, but it would have been an actual towel near her body that would have been her own. Next, Patricia is, according to someone I spoke to, Patricia's Catholic. Jemima McDonald, Catholic, from a more working class family, has 3 kids, recently broke up with her husband, single mother, trying to raise 3 kids in this area to the east there, kind of impoverished, getting helped out by people in the neighborhood, desperate to meet a man. She's going out. She goes out one night and she says how she's met this nice guy. She goes out on another night. It's believed that she met the same guy. She said she was going to meet the same person. She's found once again near her home in an abandoned tenement building, and she's been beaten and strangled, partially nude. So unlike Patricia Docker, who was fully nude, she's partially nude. And she is also on her period, as evidenced by the presence of a sanitary towel, which is, I think, placed next to her body. It's made to be conspicuous. Okay. Then finally, we have Helen Puddock, who I'm told is a Protestant, lives in the West End of town. Not from a wealthy family by any means, but of more means than Jemima McDonald, and I think probably Patricia Docker. Once again, she's married, but her relationship with her husband, I think he's at home that night, but there's kind of an implication that things aren't great. She has a child. She goes out with her sister or sister-in-law, I can't remember, Jeannie, and this is where we get more information, because she's out with Jeannie. They go to the Barrowland, and they both meet these men who they spend the night dancing with. Jeannie is with Castle Milk John. That's because he gives the name John, and he says he's from Castle Milk, which is the working class area of Glasgow to the south. He is a friendly guy. He has the rough hands of a laborer. Castle Milk John is not a suspect. He's of relevance because he was with Jeannie, and he's a witness that never came forward. Helen dances with a guy who also describes himself as John. The joke becomes, that's the name that you give when you're out cheating on your wife and you don't want anyone to know about it. And this John he's a stranger. He's dressed, he has an outmoded form of dress. He's kind of dressed like it's for church, or like a business meeting or something like that. He's very well groomed, but it's a far more conservative and traditional style. His hair and everything. Got to keep in mind, this is 1969. This is the swinging 60s. They're playing, rock and roll music. The Beatles came out in 62. We're well into the era of rock and roll here, and people having long hair and such. And this guy doesn't have any of that. He's old fashioned. He takes out her chair for her.
He was a redhead, wasn't he?
Depends who you ask.
Okay.
Yeah, this could be one of the false trails in the case. And as the evening goes on, he gets a bit stranger. As they're leaving the club together, Jeannie puts some money in a cigarette machine and doesn't get her cigarettes. And Helen's John goes to the manager and just tears him out. Like, she put her money in there. There's no cigarettes. This is not acceptable. Now, you have to understand that Glasgow is a place, particularly back then in the Barrowland, where infamously, the bouncers want to beat you up. There's even been places like that I was aware of, when I was young and going out as a teenager and as a student. There's just some bad places where you don't talk like that to the bouncers or the management. They're looking for an excuse. And the Barrowland was one of them. This guy doesn't. He gets away with it, which is interesting. He's seen to be nervously fingering a pin or something like that on his lapel, as if touching it for reassurance, but that's an interpretation. No one can remember what this is. At one point, after he talks to the manager, Helen says to him, now this is according to Jeannie, okay? Jeannie says that Helen talks to him after he chews out the manager, and she says, so how you be so brave? And he pulls out and he shows her like a card in a wallet or something like that, or like a badge or something potentially. So then a lot of people go police. Well, not necessarily, but possibly, right? He gets in the taxi with Helen and Jeannie to go west to where they live. They live in the same area, roughly, not houses not next to each other, but roughly the same area. Castle McJohn goes off, is never heard from again. Castle McJohn has been making comments to Jeannie all night. Yeah, this guy's peculiar. I don't trust him. There's something about this guy I don't like. So Bible John and Helen and Jeannie are riding home in this taxi, and John starts getting, and that's how he gets the name Bible John. He starts getting weirder and weirder. He's saying things, according to Jeannie, in the cab, like places like the Barrowlands are den of iniquities. You know, that's what my father says, dens of iniquity. And I heard that the owners burned the place down for the insurance money, and they're full of adulterous women. And and he talks about how people like that should be stoned, and how that I think that was something. I'm not sure about that. Check that if you're really serious about the case. He talks about a Bible verse with a woman standing at a well. Well, I looked into that. It's Old Testament. I think it was from Leviticus. I could keep going. He gives more and more tidbits according to Jeannie. Point is, they get back to the area. He insists on Jeannie being dropped off first. Then the cabbie drops Helen on her street, and John gets out and starts following Helen. The taxi driver sees them arguing. He gets out of there. The next day, Helen's found beaten, raped, strangled with a sanitary towel tucked into her armpit in the backyard of one of the houses. It seems like from the forensic evidence that at one point she took off running into the back of one of the houses, was trying to get to a train track at the back of the garden. He grabbed her, beat her, pulled her back, raped and strangled her. Items, handbags, things like that found in, I think it's the River Cart. That rings a bell. I better not get into any more details because we're stretching like what I remember here. But so the point is that was Peter Tobin Bible John. Okay, in my opinion, he wasn't Bible John. I think they should have looked at him. I think they were good to look at him. But based upon the things that he said, that Jeannie said, this suspect said in the cab, I think he sounds more like a devout Protestant than a Catholic. And you have to understand the differences between those things at the time, specifically the type of Protestantism that was prevalent in Scotland as Presbyterianism. Presbyterianism is Calvinism. John Calvin, like, this is one of the guys that was very interested in Old Testament. They were certain types of Protestants, because they were looking at the Bible more holistically. They focused on the Old Testament about as much as they did on the New Testament. Whereas Catholics historically, and particularly the way it's been preached, it's been more of a focus on the New Testament, which is, more about Jesus. Where Calvinists, Protestants, Presbyterians, it's more of the whole thing. And that type of rhetoric and language, I think, is more consistent with a Presbyterian. There's a type of more hardcore Presbyterian in Scotland too, called the Free Presbyterians, Free Church of Scotland. And so I had these suspicions. I consulted with I think she was a doctor of divinity in Scotland. I did not tell her what I thought. I simply told her the facts of the case. She came back and told me she thought it was a Presbyterian, a Protestant. Tobin is a Catholic. So right there, that's quite significant. Another point of significance is no knife used in these crimes, no cutting. These women are beaten and strangled. Okay. So big divergence from what we know about Tobin. Some of the physical descriptions don't match Tobin as well. So I think it's a serial killer. The Bible John. I don't think it's Peter Tobin.
Do you have any, before we finish off here, do you have any final thoughts on Peter Tobin or on the Bible John cases?
Not really. No, I mean, Bible John's interesting. It's hard to believe that guy stopped killing. At the same time, it doesn't seem to be compulsive. If he is a rapist who's reacting to women on their periods, it could be that he's not addicted to killing, and he's just putting himself in situations where, you know, obviously he's screwed up, but that screwed up psychology is reacting to things. And, you know, he says, I've got to stop doing this. Like, I'm going to get in trouble here, and just stops. You know, who is he? That's interesting. He seems more middle class than a lot of the other people that go to the Barrow Land. Certainly more so than his victims. Probably, I think, came from a religiously oppressive family with like an authoritarian father figure. Freemasonry, not like the killings are some Freemason ritual, but he has this pin that he fingers. There's a Freemason lodge near the golf course where the purse is found in the river. So that's an angle I was always looking at. Yeah, I think probably disagreeable, very temperamental person, known to be explosive, unpleasant to be around. Fastidious, which is an overlap. Both of these are overlaps with Tobin, so this is a case for it, right? But then again, you know, all serial killers are disagreeable. And fastidiousness and cleanness, that's just one trait that several serial killers can share and many can't share, right? So, or won't share. Probably very close-minded, not someone who's interested in ideas, music, culture, you know, a bit of a stick in the mud, more about tradition. And probably not a very extroverted person, probably someone who'd rather spend time by himself, who doesn't like being out in public, he just felt that he needed to. So those are the types of things you'd be looking for in that offender.
And before I finish off here, I got one last question for you, and this kind of leads into the next show with Peter Faulding and his forensic search.
Mm-hmm.
With Peter Tobin, when he moved from Bathgate to Margate and took Vicky Hamilton's body, why do you think he left the knife? Do you think that was an accident? He wasn't thinking about it? What do you think?
That's most likely. This idea of serial killers wanting to leave calling cards or little clues, I think that we believe that because of movies, but generally, no, they don't want to get themselves in trouble like that. He probably was so concerned with just getting the body out of there quick that he forgot that he'd also put a knife in the grave.
The knife was in the floorboards in the ceiling. It was inside the house.
Oh, okay. Forgot about it probably then. And, you know, if it's not linked to a body, it's a lot less risky, right? I mean, there could be a knife for anything. I mean, if you found a knife in your ceiling, would you necessarily call the police and go like, this is a murder weapon? Well, you might, but most people wouldn't. So, and, you know, maybe later he could have been on his way there, right? Driving all the way down, you know, he's made good time. It's like he's into England now. He's left Scotland. And then like it's somewhere in Yorkshire or something. He's like, oh shit, the fucking knife. And then, well, I'm not turning around and going back because it's riskier that I'm driving with a body in my car.
Right. Nobody's going to find it anyway. I'll just leave it.
And if they do, are they going to do anything about it? Can they link it to a murder? Right. Yeah. And he's right. Because, you know, until it was linked to a murder, nobody cared.
And that's probably happened thousands of times.
Yeah.
right? Where evidence has been found, but nobody thinks anything of it, and it just gets thrown out or used or kept or whatever.
Yeah, what's this box of old photographs? Well, whatever. They're all moldy. Throw them out and full of like murder victims or something, right?
Well, Lee, thank you so much. There you have it, STS Nation. Dr. Lee Mellor, aka Dr. Murder, giving us his thoughts on Peter Tobin and on Bible John. I'd love to have you back on. And anytime you're willing to come on and give your insight, your analysis, psychological assessments of offenders or cases, the door's open. You're welcome
Okay,
anytime.
cool.
Thank you, Doc, and thank you, STS Nation, and stay safe.